All right. Well, welcome everybody. We've got a lot of people who have signed up for this, over 1,300 of you. So you're excited about this event, and so are we. Welcome to Spiritual Thought. It is going to be an authentic conversation on sacredness and centeredness and hope. It's been put on by the good people at Random House, and specifically the Convergent Books imprint, of which all of the authors tonight are from. I'm Jonathan Merritt, and I'm going to be the moderator tonight with our amazing panelists who, like the Convergent Books family itself, represent a wide swath of spiritualities and perspectives. Our time tonight's going to run about an hour, and so we're not going to have long, but we're going to talk with some of the brightest young writers on the topics of spirituality and meaning, about tools and practices and ideas that have helped them survive the difficult time that we're living in. I was reading recently Sandro Galea, a professor and a dean at the School of Public Health at Boston University, who called 2020 the Great American Trauma. And we have experienced in this last year civil unrest and racial tension, economic collapse, global pandemic, and a loss of American life and global citizens that's just staggering. In addition to these events, we had wildfires and murder hornets and impeachments and elections and all kinds of chaos. And so everybody on here, whether you're one of our panelists or whether you're just sort of tuning in, we're all survivors. And I would actually like to now introduce you to our survivors who are also panelists. First up is going to be Jedidiah Jenkins. Jedediah, if you know him, he is a travel writer. He's an entrepreneur. He is the New York Times best-selling author of To Shake the Sleeping Self. He also has the best beard on this call. Actually, he wins that award.
I have this little French gap. Do you see it?
It looks good though.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I love this cover. I love this book, like streams to the ocean. If you were to describe this book in a sentence, what would that sentence be?
This is a troubling question because the book is a lot, but I would say it is a collection of essays about the subjects that we must think about to live a thoughtful life.
I love that. And the subtitle is Notes on Ego, Love, and the Things That Make Us Who We Are. We're going to talk to Jed more in a minute. If you're interested in his book, like all the books mentioned tonight, you can find it in the comments section. You'll find a link to it. Next up, Cole Arthur Riley, who I'm especially excited about. We had not met before this. She's a writer. She's a liturgist. She is a speaker who is seeking a contemplative life marked by embodiment and emotion, both things that I want to ask you about in just a moment. You're also the founder of Black Liturgist, and you have recently just joined the Convergent family. I think I can say that. So I'm not able, I will, at some point I'll be holding your book right here. I'll be talking about the cover. Cole, welcome. But tell us, if your book, the book that's coming, what can you tell us in just a sentence or two?
Sure. I'm writing about spirituality, selfhood, and liberation using contemplation, but also a lot of intergenerational stories.
I love that. And if you guys are interested, even though we don't have her book with us yet, though we wish we did, if you will go to the comments section, you will find a link to Cole's website. Cole has a newsletter that you can sign up for there. I think you do even, Cole, like daily prayers, right?
Yes.
People can sign up for daily prayers and stay in touch with you, and then they will know when your book comes out. So make sure to do that. Our next panelist is Sarah Bessey, one of my favorite people. the best-selling author of Miracles and Other Things, and Jesus Feminist, which was the book that was sort of Other Reasonable Things, I should say, and Jesus Feminist, which was such an important book, I think, to so many people in my world. You're also a wife and a mom and a proud Canadian, I should say. Proud Canadian. Sarah, your most recent book, and I love this cover, is A Rhythm of Prayer, and it's a collection of prayers, not just of your own, but of many other people that folks here would know. Barbara Brown Taylor, who's I love, Lisa Sharon Harper, who I adore. I mean, it's just a knockout list. Sarah, tell us about this book. How would you describe this in a sentence or so?
I'm so happy to be here and happy to see your face. It's a collaborative book, like you said. It brings together a community of people to not just teach us how to pray, but actually to give us a glimpse into their prayer lives. And so it includes prayers from an incredible group of leaders and activists and thinkers. But I think at the core, it's about reimagining, reintroducing ourselves, expanding our views of prayer, and giving us permission to relearn how to pray in new ways and ancient ways too.
I love that. Highly recommend this one as well, especially because it's just a collection of all my favorite people. And you can find this also in the comments section. We're going to talk to Sarah a little bit more in a moment. And then we would have had another Canadian on this call, Kate Bowler, who is a professor at Duke Divinity School, author of the New York Times bestseller, Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I've Loved. You can get a copy of this as well, but she is not going to be with us. However, Kate did send us a little video because she was so sad that she didn't get to be with all of you, and she did want to give each of you a word, and I'd love for you to take a look at that right now.
Hey everyone, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with you. Last minute immigration drama, which is my life. So I am so glad though to be able to say hi. And they just asked if I might say something about, well, not my pandemic drama, but things that have been sustaining and life-giving this year. Just like everyone else, pandemic was a different kind of being human. It was, I always think and talk a lot about this lovely word, precarity, like the feeling that you are being dangled by a thread. So many of us have had that kind of experience in our life where we're more delicate, more fragile, more made of paper than we ever were before. And this season was a lot of, I have been living with chronic cancer for years, and now I'm in a good place, but not in a place where a pandemic can be a tolerable level of risk. So things that have been giving me life have been amazing books. I found myself rereading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy a lot lately because I loved the absurdism of just the feeling that maybe your planet will blow up at any time. That felt right. I listened to a whole series on Audible, Before They Are Hanged, which is this really gory adventure series where mostly people murder each other. For some reason, I found that very comforting. And then I really liked Frederick Baker's. He's a preacher and a writer, and he wrote a beautiful book called Telling Secrets. And by the first line of it, he's just undergone this insane tragedy, but he does it with this super spare, cold, beautiful prose. So I've been reading a lot. I've been, like everyone else, walking around their neighborhood, sadly, talking on the phone too loudly. So that's also really working for me. But I will keep this short. Everyone in this conference call is just my absolute favorite. So say hello to them for me. And I hope to see you all again soon in a less dramatic situation.
Well, who does not love Kate Bowler? I love her so much. I'm going to bring our panelists back in. I want to ask them some questions. Somebody is saying, Matt, saying, we love you, Kate. Literally, to know Kate Bowler is to love Kate Bowler. So I'm glad that she could say a little something and be with us. But hi, everyone. Now we get to chat. I would love, Cole, if I could start with you and just ask something, because behind all of this, and of course it's probably stirred up because every time that Kate says anything, it makes me emotional. You talk about sort of the sacredness of emotion, and you talk about this wide spectrum of emotion, even rage, which is not something I think I grew up thinking was a holy emotion or even acceptable. Talk to us about the importance of emotions, processing them, expressing them, feeling, as a friend of mine says, feeling the unfeelable feelings. Talk to us about the sacredness in that and how that anchors us in times like we're living in.
Right. I think so many of us are trained to apologize for our emotions before we're taught to understand them and articulate them and experience them. And I think that really leads to an impoverished spirituality when we're incapable of naming the truth of our interior lives. I think it does something to us. I think it erodes our relationships to others. It erodes our relationships to self when we become numb. And so I've been learning a spirituality that really embraces anger, rage as something that can possess the sacred. I think historically in Black communities, it absolutely has. It has led to great change. It's led to also a lot of lament and exhale. And I think I'll say this, whiteness historically has not practiced anger well. And so I think when white dominated spaces and even sometimes individuals come into contact with rage, they are terrified of it because they can only conceive of the kind of rage that would lead someone to, put someone else in chains or on an auction block. It has not practiced its own rage well. And so I think it kind of trains everyone else to be really fearful of our rage instead of collectively determining, okay, how can we really process this in a healthy way? Can this be a redeemable thing? And I have experienced that it can.
What's a just as a way of a follow-up, because I'm curious. So if somebody said they're looking for a practice for a healthy expression of a rage they feel, right? Maybe it's a repressed rage that's starting to come out, or just there's something they feel and they want to express it and they don't know how. Is there a way in the contemplative tradition, which is a tradition that you're steeped in, is there a way that you could recommend and you'd say, you know what, this is something I've done and I've found that to be a very effective way to sort of twist the release valve?
So I have many New Year's Eve traditions. Among them, at 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve, whoever I'm with, we go outside and we scream at the top of our lungs for 60 seconds, 30 seconds. And it's absolutely ridiculous. It's, cheesy in many ways, but every single year that I've done it, I have felt it's been a spiritual experience by the end. We then follow it up with a minute of complete silence, and you're just standing after having, after bearing witness to the cries of the people in your midst, and you don't get any explanation, and then you just rest in the silence for 60 seconds. I think that's a beautiful embodied practice for rage. If you are able, if you have the space without someone calling the cops on you, do that.
I love that. Sarah, your book, A Rhythm of Prayer, is born in part out of emotion. grief, and a very close friend of yours, who was a friend of mine, but a very close friend of yours, dear friend of yours, Rachel Held Evans, passed away. And you include in the opening a dedication to her, which I'd love for you to read if you wouldn't mind, because it's beautiful. I think it models a kind of comfortability with expressing emotion. And then maybe could you share with us the role that grief played in the creation of this book for you?
Yeah, this was the project that I put my hand to in the immediate aftermath of losing Rachel. I've been wanting to write about prayer for a while. It was something that came up often in my work and with the conversations that I was able to have with people, but it never really felt like quite the right time just yet. And I wasn't quite sure how to take a run at it. After losing Rachel, I needed to work. I needed something to put my hand to. And the idea of wanting to talk about prayer came back to me. But I knew then that it wasn't something that I wanted to do or could do in that first season of grief on my own. And so I was reminded of prayer circles, which have, roots in so many different traditions and so many different communities and cultures, and said, you know what I need is something communal. And so gathering together prayers with these leaders and activists and thinkers who have deeply shaped my own life, and having a chance to rest almost in their prayers while reimagining prayer myself ended up becoming a year of healing, not just because I needed to work, but also to rest, I think, and to grieve well. And even as Cole was saying, become more familiar with lament and with rage and with grief, to name those things, to learn again what it means to bring your whole self into prayer instead of feeling like somehow you need to, curate or perform in those spaces, that this can be the most honest and most authentic space for us. So yeah, that's what kind of led to it. But I'll read that dedication that you mentioned. For Rachel Held Evans, who gave permission to a generation, who made origami out of hate mail, who kept the faith, who told the truth, who dared to wonder, what if I'm wrong, out loud, who was willing to keep wrestling until the blessing came, who pulled up more chairs to the table and scooted over to make room, who made us laugh and made us think, who was bold and courageous and kind, who would not be budged from her conviction that this gospel is good news for everyone, who moved to the margins because she knew this is the center of God's story, who never lost her love for telling that story, who loved us and whom we loved. Jedidiah, woman of valor.
Thank you for that. As you wrote this and collected these, you talk about the reimagining of prayer. How does prayer look different for you now than it did before you went through this experience?
That's a good question. I think that I've probably had to reimagine and reevaluate my relationship with prayer no less than a dozen times. My faith tradition and the roots of my initial kind of spiritual experiences were very rooted in American prosperity gospel, which might surprise people since I live in Western Canada and have my whole life. But for some reason, the tentacles of it reach everywhere. God bless colonization. So we ended up here in this space of needing to relearn how to pray a million times because of if you grow up in praying in a particular way or understanding prayer in a particular way, in my case, a lot of naming and claiming, that ends, right? And so I think that oftentimes our thresholds for reimagining, or the invitation that we have from God, is often on the threshold of some grief. There is something that moves it from being something that's intellectual that you can talk about in a pub over an IPA with your buddies into something that actually is a matter of survival and is a matter of knowing yourself and being able to keep moving. And so for me, I think the reimagining of prayer that happened most recently was then. But that's where I think the reimagining became something that's communal, that is wide and expansive and welcoming, that brings the rage and the contemplation and the activism that Cole was talking about as well, that you can rest in liturgies and in silence and in breath. Writing benedictions has become really important to me. So all these different pathways of prayer mean that there's so many more invitations than I think I was initially maybe prepared to know about prayer, which then gave prayer back to me after I felt like I'd lost it for a long time.
Thank you for sharing that. Jed, we're talking about emotions and embracing emotions, and I was interested. There's a part in your book where you sort of confess or admit that, you know, your tendency is to escape these big hard feelings, right? Or the pain, to run from the pain. And you can do that with travel and adventure. And you're a travel writer, a great travel writer. So you're sort of known for that. But that can also become a kind of like a coping mechanism or an escape mechanism. Talk a little bit about, you know, this last year, we haven't been able to travel like we have in the past. What does that mean for someone like you who has these kind of tendencies to escape? What has that been like for you? And what has that forced you to confront that you would have otherwise run away from?
It was such an interesting year because when your normal routine of life, even though I like think I don't have a routine, but my routine is breaking up my routine, going on adventures, traveling, saying yes to every opportunity. I really didn't know what it meant to be grounded, to actually watch a season change. I spend most of my time in Los Angeles, and we do have seasons. Right now it's rainy season, and the wildflowers are beginning to pop out of the soil, and I'm watching them every day grow by a millimeter, and I care. I like walk out there with my coffee and I'm like, oh, you're doing such a great job. And I've never been still enough to see something like that.
Mm.
And I bet you a lot of people that have tuned into this panel discussion know what the Enneagram is, but it's a personality signifier. I don't even know what you call it, but I am an Enneagram 7, which is an enthusiast. I am always happy. I'm the life of the party. Let's party. But one of the things that the Enneagram taught me was that Enneagram 7s, they are a foundational fear, a root fear that they manage under the surface is pain, and they run from pain. And this was a clarity that I did not have about myself until I read Richard Rohr's book on the Enneagram and then followed into more. And it was just, I had the dawning of that realization about myself. And then COVID-19 said, you are going to stay home and look in the mirror and do a workout at home forever. And so it just caused me to begin this self-discovery against my will, which so often some of the hardest and most important lessons are against our will. And so I don't know, that there's a quote that has really motivated my life, which is a question rightly asked is half answered. And I think that once I figured out what was motivating my constant thirst for escape and travel and discovery, it unlocked almost like reaching a new level of a video game. It unlocked something in me where I met myself anew, and I discovered the ability to sit and enjoy myself, enjoy hanging out with myself, enjoy time with creation. And I don't know, I think I'm forever changed because of the lens that 2020 specifically gave me.
You have a chapter, Jed, in your book on home. I like each of they're all one word, but one of the chapters is on home. And, you know, it sort of is connected to what you're talking about. How has spending so much concentrated time in your physical home, how has it sort of shaped or changed or even reinforced what you already believed about kind of the sacred nature of capital H home?
Well, that's a great question. I love my home in LA. It's this beautiful house that I share with roommates, this like old, I can't imagine. We always joke like, what if I could buy it? Like, which I can't, but if I could, I'm like, I know if some surveyor came here, they would discover that like one raindrop in this thing will collapse. It's very old, but it's so cute. And I just like the arched doorways, the tile, and it's been here since the 20s, which means there are families that have lived, like there are baby handprints, little kid handprints in the cement that I walk over every day walking. I don't know these people. Some kid grew up here. Actually, a couple years ago, we had this lady come to our door. She was probably 40. And she said, "Can I look around the house?" And we were like, "Uh-oh." And she was like, "I grew up here and my placenta is buried in the backyard." Okay, this is very Los
Whoa.
Angeles. And I was like, "Get
Whoa.
in here." Well, my roommate was like, "Come." I mean, maybe it's there, and I'm sure it's now a tree, but this concept of like, I guess when we think, and this is what I really studied in this chapter in my book, is what gives a sense of place, the holiness of home to a person, because I'm sure either you are or you've known people in your life who were like military kids and they moved every year or every 2 years. And I've had such interesting conversations with them because the nomadic nature of their childhood made home basically where their parents were, like the energy of their parents in a room, because the walls were ever changing, the city was changing, the landscape was changing. And so it really is the power that place has over your story, or at least the interplay of place and your life story. And so I've lived in this house for 5 years of my adult life in my 30s, the most, me becoming a writer, me having 2 books published in this home and celebrating. And these walls are just haunted with joy. And so I just think the concept of home is a very spiritual, amorphous feeling that's different for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And to me, it's a very positive feeling. It can be a hard feeling for some because people, especially gay kids, often run from home. Home is a place of pain, and they go create a new home. And that is like a rite of passage for a lot of kids that grow up in a difficult situation. And so I've definitely done that with the city of Los Angeles and with this house. And I don't know, I'm grateful to it.
Thanks for sharing that. That a lot of that resonates with me. I'd love to ask Cole. I'd like to ask you another question, because we've got this sort of interior, exterior, inside, outside, right? The places that we live and the places we explore, and it's bringing up to me this idea of being you're contemplative, right? Somebody who sort of does this deep inner work, and yet there's this activist side. And I know that phrase sounds kind of probably weird to people, like a contemplative activist. It sort of feels oxymoronic. Can you talk about, like, in your own life, what it has meant to balance that kind of grounding work? Because we've all needed to stay anchored with everything that's been going on in the world, and also this kind of truth telling, or this external activistic work, which we all also have had to do because of everything that's been going on in our world. What is that? How do you balance those things? How does that fit together? How do they coexist? Share a little wisdom with us, if you will.
Sure. I'm glad that you asked this question. I had a mentor, someone who I really admire. When I first began Black Liturgies, I was processing two tensions I was feeling, and he helped me put language to, this tension between the contemplative and the activist. And he actually said, if there is a person who is both contemplative and activist and who does both well, I've not yet met them. And in that moment, I just thought, like, challenge accepted. That's what I want. That's what I want my calling to be. That's what I'm gonna try to do. And I hope he's watching this now. So I think, not all, but a lot of activism has been emptied of self-reflection and attunement. And we kind of need to reclaim that a bit and to recognize that a lot of contemplative habits, a lot of contemplative habits have everything to do with justice. If you spend time really excavating your interior world, really peeling back the layers of ugliness and beauty that reside in you, it absolutely changes how you go about social change. It absolutely changes how you move in the world, who you center, who you idolize. And I think that it can be an act of justice. Oh, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but I think looking down to seeing what parts of yourself hold a whip and a chain, what parts of yourself are holding those, that is how other people will get free. Marching is great, but when you're able to find it in yourself, that's going to help me get free. And when I'm able to find that, that's going to help someone else get free. So we have to stop divorcing these things. It's hard though. It does seem like a tension, and it's good to kind of name that, but I think we can do it.
Do you think too that, and I don't want to take a utilitarian perspective on contemplative practice, but in some ways, doesn't contemplative practice sort of ground us or fuel us for the work, right? And then the work drives us back to reflect. Does it seem that they sort of feed each other, or they exist sort of in a cycle with each other?
Yes, absolutely. And I think really moving experiences happen when it becomes less of a cycle and more of two things happening simultaneously. I think those moments are when we pause to recognize in the moment, when you're sitting with someone or doing something, when you're able to recognize it as a spiritual experience. I think that moment is something in you has bridged the contemplative in you and the activist. But I think you're right that it is a cycle, that it helps you ground and do better social work and advocate better. But also in the moment, if I'm staring at you and able to at the same time be really attuned to you and attuned to what Howard Thurman would call the sound of the genuine in me, if I'm able to do that simultaneously, I think that is the real beauty mark.
Mm-hmm. I want to, on a related note, Sarah, and I don't know if you would call this a cycle or a movement, although I kind of feel like I cycle through this, but there are three movements in your book: orientation, disorientation, reorientation. Or I've heard people say, I'm in my deconstruction. They'll talk about, construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. There are sort of ways to put this, but you've got these three parts. Talk about that as a kind of sort of spiritual framework, or spiritual sort of on a macro level, the thing that we move through, because it sounds very disruptive. If you go through a period of disorientation or deconstruction, it sounds very disruptive, and yet it feels like this necessary progress that we go through spiritually, where we start with something we believe or think or do, and we sort of tear it down and build it back up. Talk to me about, how did you discover this as a rhythm or a flow, and what does it mean in the context of prayer?
I think that one of the biggest things that I realized about that cycle is that I think a lot of times we talk about, spiritual growth or journeys, and we think of them almost as something that's linear, like you're progressing or something, when in reality we often continue to revisit and circle around these rhythms in our life, if you're paying attention anyway. And so I think that, I have gone through these cycles so many different times in my life in so many different ways, in terms of spirituality, in terms of my relationship with organized religion, with my relationship with scripture, with my, relationships with people. I mean, it just in so many different ways. I think the big shift for me, though, and the realization that I had probably about 15 or 16 years ago, is that I had been taught to fear the disorientation, to see any type of questioning or pushing back or criticism or self-reflection, like we've talked about here even this evening, as somehow dangerous. That curiosity and wonder was to be feared, in terms of just the safe and tidy thing is to stay in the box that we've constructed for God or for you in your life, right? And to not ever begin to wonder about what's outside of that. And I think that the realization that actually the disorientation is part of that journey, that it's if you're not feeling that sense of being unsettled or that sense of disorientation or sense of wilderness, or discomfort, then you're probably not paying attention. And so there's an invitation there. And so I think the shift in posture then becomes, what's the invitation when this isn't working anymore? When these pathways are gone, when God has maybe disappeared like steam on a mirror as you used to understand God, or these other things have happened, grief, rage, longing, joy, revelations, I think apocalypse that we've all undergone, like you were talking about the great trauma of these times. These are things that reveal us and disorient us. And so then the invitation then is to unlearn what we thought we knew and relearn but you need to have that space. And so when it came to prayer, I wanted to structure the book a little bit that way, because to me that felt really true to what spiritual journeys look like, and that it's not a matter of the book progressing from one end to the other, even though there is a thread, that we've tried to pull through, but people can move in and out as what speaks to them or what season of life they're in. I mean, if they need to have some imprecatory psalms about things and have some rage, that's there. If they need to have some joy and some wonder, that's there. If you're needing to have prayers for the forgotten ones, those things are there. And I think being able to hold space and hold room for all of that mirrors more the human experience as I've experienced it. Anyway, I think especially in that way.
What is I mean, I know because I've read the book, but what is a prayer of disorientation even look like for those who haven't read this? How would you even describe a disoriented prayer?
I'm gonna pick it up because I don't want to. For instance, one prayer that I thought was really wise and helpful right now actually was by Lisa Sharon Harper, and she had one called A Prayer for America, that is really just almost a cry of grief and brutality and acknowledgement and lament that I think most people don't expect to see in a book of prayer that's, beautifully all done or whatever else, right? Which, listen, I like to surprise people. I think that there was this sense of the disorientation in that prayer of saying, you get to say these things to God, and that we have sometimes painted what Kate, who I'm really sad she couldn't be here tonight, but Kate always calls it toxic positivity. And we almost kind of, layer that over our conversations with God or our conversations with one another. And I think the disorientation people can sometimes experience is to say, you get to bring all of that to these spaces of contemplation, these spaces of prayer and of communion with God and with one another, and let that be true. Right. And so I think that that's part of what's really important to name and acknowledge, just as much as the joy and as the graces and the gratitude and those types of things, which are also part of that journey.
Right. Jed, you talk about something in your book that I would love to bring up, because lots of people have had tensions, frustrations with their families in this time. Talk about disorientation. It's like, you believe what? You voted for who? Or whatever that moment is. Or we found ourselves in close confines with people that we ordinarily can't escape. And without that way to relieve the stress, we find that we relate to them in a completely different way. You share in your book a little bit about, you talk about sort of that healing those bonds. You talk about it, I think, with regard to your brother in particular, I believe. And what do you say to folks who we're hoping for, as we kind of now turn this what we hope is maybe into a period of reorientation? And part of that movement, we would like to see some healing in those family bonds that are precious to us, but have become incredibly fraught with misunderstanding, frustration, disappointment. What have you learned about what it means to heal within family that might be helpful to some folks out there who could use a little bit of advice in that area?
Yeah, what a time to be alive. I think so there's a lot of ways to approach this question. I think one of them being, I will defer to one of my teachers, which is he's a social scientist, Jonathan Haidt. He wrote a fantastic book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Disagree About Politics and Religion. And he is the most reintegrated, reordered, reoriented person in terms of political thought and like religious thought that I've ever come across, besides maybe Richard Rohr and everyone on this panel. And when I tell you that the way he explains, well, he has so many just great examples. But one of them is, if you look at even like the political spectrum of our country, it is very strange that almost it goes down the middle, half and half. Like, and within families, two kids born in the same home with the same parents can be politically opposite of each other and believe deeply offensive things to the other one, which is strange, because if you believe that parenting matters all that much and which school you go to and how many piano classes you have or whatever affects your outcome, and then you can believe psychotically disparate things about what's best for society, that is interesting. That there is some hidden nugget of truth in that observable statistic, and it can't just be the power of propaganda because you grew up in the same house as these people. So to me, that like sparked a deep curiosity, because about half of my family is politically, spiritually, almost diametrically opposed to what I believe is a life of thriving and is what's best for our species, our planet, and the human soul. And so, and it's like the urgency to be right with your worldview is a toxic certainty that I was given with like Southern Tennessee evangelical Christianity, that was my way or the highway. And by the way, the highway is burning in hell. And so it was a long journey for me to find that understanding of, what does it mean that half of us think this? And how can I really believe that half of these people are evil? Can I really believe my mother, who would do anything for me, is evil? So that's one pocket. The second pocket is the power of loving boundaries. So, for example, I have family members who believe that my sexuality is a death sentence. And that is deeply hurtful, and I believe a moral crisis and deeply wrong. And so me just like, oh, let's love each other and have unity while they believe something that's directly harmful to my life requires the hard establishment of boundaries. But it's pretty interesting. Once you stand up and you establish boundaries in your own life with your family, not all, but I can speak from my family. It actually, once you know the ground rules of the game you're playing, it's like, okay, we don't agree about this, and you now know exactly what I believe, and I know what you believe, but I love you, and I will not abandon you, and I have built a life where I feel safe in my own life, and you can no longer hurt me. And so now I can love you from abundance and from a safe distance. And that is like, those are in the real hard disagreements. But I think the power of boundaries and the power of understanding are the two major keys in that process of healing.
Mm-hmm. I had one of my very good friends today. We were talking on the phone, and she said, she described boundaries as a tool to prevent you from slipping into resentment. Because if you don't state what's being crossed and you keep allowing it to be crossed, you build up within you this repressed rage that becomes resentment against someone. But once you name the boundary, there becomes accountability. And I thought that's an interesting way to say, I want to protect myself from building resentment against you. And so I'm going to give voice to boundaries. I think that's fantastic. Follow-up question. You brought into this, and you haven't specifically mentioned this, but it's chapter 1 in your book. It's the first, big word in the subtitle is ego. So there's also that part of me, right, that is seeking something, or wants to run the show. What is the role of the ego in all of this? Is you're kind of finding your way as a son, as a gay man, is you finding your way through this? What role is the ego playing in that?
Well, I really use the word ego in my book to represent the general sense of self and the pursuit of that. I don't mean it in the negative sense of self over others. I just mean it as like figuring out what the hell am I? Like, what is this unique miracle of being alive and conscious and the universe waking up and seeing itself? This is incredible. And I just think that sort of what I said earlier, a question rightly stated is half answered. I think a healthy journey into self, into root wants and needs, sets you up for making good choices, for understanding the root cause of trauma responses that you might call your personality, and then you look a little deeper and you're like, oh, actually I do that because A, B, and C happened, and I'm actually scared of abandonment, rejection, whatever, and I turn to comedy to like cover up. For me, I had a crossroads moment. I know the moment. I was standing in the hall in 7th grade and a kid bullied me, and I remember thinking, wow, he bullied me and because I talk funny. I can either become horribly mean and become the meanest person in this school, or I could be funny and make him like me. It was like two angels and demons on my shoulder. And I remember it wasn't even a moral choice. I remember thinking, it feels more tiring to be mean. I'd rather just be funny. And so I chose to be like a nice, funny person and like kill him with kindness and comedy. But that was like, and now that's such a part of my personality is being lighthearted and fun. But there's a root cause, which was someone threatening me and making me feel scared and frightened of my own self. So anyway, I think that excavation is crucial. There's this therapy retreat center place called Onsite outside of Nashville that changed my life. And one of the things they taught me there was, if you're hysterical, it's historical. And it goes to what you said about why we act the way that we act. And I think that there are things when you start to uncover your own history of the building blocks of who you are and what makes you the way that you are, you can insulate yourself from triggering circumstances, and you can better find your boundaries for a life where you thrive.
I love that. I've got one question I want to ask each of you, and then I've got a final. I do want to ask Cole. I've got one more question for you as well. I'd love to know when we get off of this, people who they got a little sentence here, sentence there, they're going to be real happy with that. But if they can get a book, they can actually do the work, spend some time, reflect. Obviously, we're book people. We write books. But I'd love to know for each of you, what is it that you either are reading or is on your reading list for 2021, or maybe something you've just read that you would say, that's the book. That's the book that I'm walking with in this season of life. Anyone can go first. And if you're muted, you may have to unmute, by the way. I don't know who. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
yes,
I'll start with just what I'm currently reading because it's huge, so I'll be reading this forever. But Jill Lepore's These Truths, I don't know if you guys, maybe this book came out last year. It's a history of the United States. She's a regular contributor to the New Yorker magazine. But it's been so interesting because for me at least, as contemplative and quiet and watching the flowers grow at my house, like as America burns, I'm very interested in like, what is America? What are we even talking about here? Because there's a lot of argument. And I just feel, especially when I'm like, one thing I'm interested in is bridging the political divide in families, because there's such a, there's some great articles, I think, in The Atlantic where as traditional religion has eroded and secularism has risen, human beings are spiritual creatures, specifically religious creatures, and we seek magical thinking to explain the complexities of our world. And a lot of people have replaced religious fervor with political fervor. It's very much a religion, and there's creeds and there's pronouncements of faith, and that fascinates me. And so this book, I'm a couple hundred pages in, and it's fantastic.
All right, that I've never heard of it, but that sounds fascinating. Jill Lepore, These Truths. Awesome. Thanks, Jed. All right, Cole or Sarah, either one. Cole?
Yeah, I'm currently reading a book called Survival and Ambition: How to Become a Poet. It's by Christian Wyman. I highly recommend all of his poetry, but his prose is beautiful as well. His book, My Bright Abyss, has gotten me through a lot. But going into 2021, on my reading list, I have a ton of books about art because I'm just beginning to process myself as an artist, but also I think art is what will heal us in this season. Absolutely. Mako Fujimura has a book that recently came out, Art and Faith, and then The Black Interior, which is a collection of essays by Elizabeth Alexander. They're on my reading list.
Awesome. Thank you. We got a whole bunch on that one. That was good. Thank you, Cole. Sarah.
Those all sound so good. Oh my goodness. Well, the book I can't shut up about right now is one that I just actually finished last week. It's called Jesus and John Wayne: How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. It's by Kristen Dumais. And I picked it up from the library because a lot of people were talking about it. I didn't read it in the beginning because I'm not American. And, to be honest, I have been rather, it's a thing. And so I ended up, just kind of not really sure if it was going to be applicable to me in my context, but heard so many good things about it, picked it up from the library on a Saturday, sat down to read it on a Sunday morning, and literally ignored all 4 of our children, all of my responsibilities until I finished it on Sunday afternoon. It's like this really well-researched and brilliant and infuriating look at this current moment. And it's incredibly readable. Definitely, I can't remember last time I read something by a historian that I would characterize as a page turner, but it definitely is. And it stirred up a lot of introspection for me personally, because I can see a lot of these same shadow forces at work in the churches of my formative years, even pre-internet, and the dominance of this way of being, and what it means, I think, for our faith and for our current moment beyond borders is really quite remarkable. So read that last week, haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. And so I have a long list of other ones I've been interested in as well. Actually, a few that Cole mentioned that I really liked, and everything Jedidiah you talked about as well sounded incredible. So we'll all be working our library cards at the end of this webinar, I think.
Oh yes, for sure. Sure. Cole, final question to you. Other than books, the thing that, as our friend Barbara Brente would say, is saving my life right now is breath. And just returning to simple breath practices and finding myself back at home in my body, which is a hard thing for me. You use that phrase a lot: inhale, exhale. Talk about the power of breath, something as simple as breath, to center us as we move forward.
Yeah, sure. You know, I hope it's no secret that we're living in very traumatic times. Hopefully we're able to recognize it as such. And there's, a lot of longstanding research that says that trauma experiences lead to disembodiment. And that's been true of myself. And I'm learning to not, if this is you, don't demonize this in yourself. I think we need a little more empathy here, that so often our disembodiment came because we felt like we needed to do that in order to survive. And that's no small thing. The irony, though, is what I think is a form of survival is actually to my peril. I see someone put "the body keeps the score" in the chat. I would highly recommend that. But all that to say, there's also research that says something as simple as placing your hand on your bare chest can steady your heartbeat. And then when you accompany that with deep breath, you're connecting to yourself. So I do these things called breath prayers with Black liturgies. It's not unique to me. I didn't think of it. It's a pretty ancient practice of connecting breath and body to prayer. But I've begun to do it, and think if you're Black and watching this, it can be particularly healing to the Black community who listen to George Floyd beg for his life and say he can't breathe, and Eric Gardner say he can't breathe. And so as you're processing, the trauma of that, and all of us processing the unique trauma of the season, I think breath is no small way to reconnect with our bodies, even if for a moment, just different times throughout the day, to just steady yourself. I encourage you to do it. And if you're able to place your hand on your chest and inhale and exhale.
Oh, thank you so much. Cole, Arthur Riley, Jedidiah Jenkins, Sarah Bessey, the Phantom of Kate Bowler. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening, and for all of you who tuned in, to Random House, to the team at Convergent. We thank you guys so much for this. Have a good evening.